G'day, Bomber fans. So obviously we had a pretty bad loss on the weekend, Essendon. There is a lot of doom and gloom, and that is understandable. I get that. So I thought this week, instead of looking at player ratings and whatnot, I'd open the floor to you guys to ask me some questions about the club and, the future, and pretty much just, I guess, try and have a discussion more than anything. I'm seeing so many questions come out of the Richmond game. There's a lot of angst, so I thought I would try my best to answer some of those questions and, put my opinion forward. Cheers for everyone leaving the questions. I did this all pretty quickly, so I've almost definitely missed a lot of them. Apologies for that, but I appreciate the effort you guys put in. This is pretty much replacing the player ratings video, so we're going to do this all in one take. It's going to be podcast vibes. I try and get one of those out a week, and we're going to get right into it, starting with Blake. And the basic, this is a pretty loaded question, and I'm going to make it a bit more general, but also try and answer it. It's on screen, you can read it. The main gist of it is, do you, or can you see improvement this year? And Blake kind of goes from a game style point of view. And it's an interesting place to start this. So obviously Essendon are as bad as they've been for a long, long time. I think we're going to finish in the bottom four. I wouldn't be surprised if we don't win another game this year. I think we're going to, have some really brutal losses as well in the coming weeks. In the spotlight too, the AFL, I don't know why they gave us so many primetime games, but they did. I think despite that, and this is obviously Blake wants to hear about the game, the style of play and everything. And I don't know, it's a bit tough to talk about that at this point because what we'll do is we'll first talk about the direction the club is taking, because I think we are clearly rebuilding. And if you don't think we are, I don't know what to tell you. But we've clearly got people leading the club, off the field who all agree that it needed a makeover. Whether those people are the right people for the job is up for debate. I think there is a major disagreement amongst fans there with, coach and president and whatnot. But we've taken the first steps in a pretty obvious rebuild. That is what we are doing. You don't name 12 debutants in a season if you're trying to win a flag. And I look at that Richmond game, and as I've said a few times, I genuinely don't care about the loss. I think we are pretty clearly in the same spot as the Tigers in terms of list build. We are rebuilding, they are rebuilding. In fact, they were actually a year older on average in that game, which, it's not an excuse or anything. I'm just saying we're doing what fans have been calling for so long. We are blooding new talent. We're culling the list. We're getting rid of dead weight. We've got an injury crisis, and we've still got guys like Dylan Shield in the VFL. It's unfortunate to be entering another rebuild, losing all these games of footy. I get the frustration, but this is what the club needed. We'd be kidding ourselves if we, think we can do anything with what Dodoro gave us. And the club itself has made it pretty clear that it will take time. It's not going to be a quick fix. We're going to be going about this with a clear lens for the future. We're going to be getting worse before we get better. And, in general, for me, that is an improvement. Because at least we're trying something. There isn't a sugar hit. There's no quick fix. We could have thrown our hat in the ring for Dan Houston, and he would have made us a better team this year. But he wouldn't have, brought us up to where we need to be, which is, winning grand finals. Not that this rebuild will get us there, but at least we're going about it the right way, which is, a long-term view. In terms of game style, I think the issue is, because we're not playing consistent footy. We can all agree that we looked really good against Gold Coast, and I think if I make this video after the Gold Coast game, the comments are more positive. Everyone's talking about how, good we looked, how connected we look, and then the week after, I make it now after that Richmond performance. And we look like that. And there are no excuses for not looking good. Like, I don't think there are many, excuses for looking as bad as we did against the Tigers. I think the issue is rebuilding teams are always crap. Like, look at West Coast. They've been shocking this year. Massive losses, horrible performances. Imagine, on top of like a West Coast or a Richmond or someone, taking away all those players as well. You're clearly going to have a lack of synergy and cohesion in your team. A lot of the time, you can blame game style. And I think for a lot of Essendon's time under Scott, you can. I didn't like the way we played last year. I don't like the overpossessing of the footy. I actually think, if anything, we've tried to, go forwards in that regards. A lot of the time we are playing in games where we are, losing by more because we're taking the game on. And even Richmond, right? I saw a fun stat, and I don't have it in front of me, I should. But if any of you kind of disagree in the comments, I can find it. We actually were not going backwards as much as people think. It surprised me at first, but I think I even saw that we had a more direct route to goals than we did against Richmond than we did against Gold Coast. And I think it was just the lack of synergy and cohesion that really made us look so bad. There were so many times where we were just missing targets, and that's not because of bad kicking, but also because of players not going in the right direction and, players who haven't worked together. So yeah, I think we're trying to play a better brand of footy in the later stages of this year, but because we're so young and such a bad team right now, it's not really working. Sometimes it works and it looks really good when it does, Gold Coast, but when it doesn't work, it looks like the Richmond game and it's horrible. So yeah, I think the best thing to do before Tasmania come in is rebuild, and that's what we're doing. We could get that sugar hit, we could keep finishing 8th or 9th, we could be a decent footy team but not a great one. I think what we're doing now is we're giving ourselves the opportunity to get better in the future. We're going backwards to go forwards. And I think that is the right thing to do. That's what we've probably needed to do for a little while now, but haven't done it. There's still going to be more changes made. We're going to be getting rid of some players, some senior players and whatnot. But yeah, I think we're doing the right thing by rebuilding, even though it's going to make us look like a bad team, because we are one, for the time being. So yeah, have we gone? What was the question? Sorry, what was it? Can you see improvement? I think so. I think, just because we're doing the tough thing, the rebuild, where and especially a year after being in the top 4, at this time of the season, we were top 4 not long before the season ended in 2024. Teams don't usually rebuild after that, but we obviously saw flaws in our list and have chosen to. So I think it's an improvement. Interesting to go off that and talk about this one from Mitch. So he asks if Brad is a good enough match day coach. And that's an interesting one, because I feel like I don't know, well, you look at the Richmond game and you'll say no. You look at the Gold Coast game, you'll say yes. That's been a lot of the year, yes and no, I think. There's been times where I've had full faith in Brad. There's been times more recently where I haven't. You could say that it's personnel. I agree. 90% of it is, but there are times where you just see Brad not really get the most out of our team. But then there are times where you look at him getting the most out of young players. And I think for what we're doing now, I don't see why we needed a different coach. I get that, in a few years, when we're, hopefully challenging for a grand final, that's when questions really start arising. But for me, we are, as I said before, we're so clearly in a rebuild. What Brad Scott has been doing this year has been playing the kids and giving them responsibility, and not even just because of injury, but he's said a few times that guys like Angus Clark won't be coming out of the side because of players returning. He's bringing in players and bringing them in for good, because he's got this clear direction with Matt Rosa, who's brought in these players, and the president. I think while we're unified as a club, with this rebuild, I don't see the need to change coach. I know that doesn't really answer your question. I don't know how to answer it, because I think is Brad a good enough match day coach for 2025? Yes. He's bringing in young players, giving them responsibilities, getting the most out of them. 4 Rising Star nominations. Will he be a good enough match day coach in the future when we're challenging for a flag? That's another question, and that's one we don't really know how to answer, unfortunately, because we've never really seen Brad Scott in that situation. But for now, I think there's no reason to be changing coach. I think he's doing what we need him to do, which is blooding the young players. I believe we're going to be having a 13th debutant pretty soon as well, which is, I think, the record pretty much. So yeah, I think that's what we need. If we're rebuilding, we need young players playing, and he is well and truly doing that. So I think for now, he's a good enough matchday coach. We'll see about the future. Angus asks, who are the first 5 players to be traded or delisted at the end of the season? Tough. It is a really tough year to predict list management. Or what's going to happen with some of our out of contract players, and I will be doing a video soon. It's tough to get done because it is a tough year to predict. I think Davey Menzies Shield and Goldstein are probably the most at risk. I would be very surprised if Davey gets a contract and Menzies and Shield. And after that, it kind of depends on what we do with other players. Like if senior players leave, if Langford gets traded, we're probably going to keep Nic Martin. If Ridley, for example, gets traded, we probably keep Laverty. So yeah, a lot of it kind of depends on what we do in the off-season with trades. And I think, we'll see a little batch of delistings, maybe 3 or 4, kind of the guys I mentioned before, the Davey, Menzies, Shields. After that, we're going to have the trade period, and then there'll be another batch of delistings because, it'll really be dependent on what changes are made for the contracted players. So yeah, tough to know. I think the first 3 players to be delisted will be Davey, Menzies, and Shield. After that, couldn't tell you. It is tough to predict. But yeah, I'll have a video out soon. Talia asks a good question actually about our reserves, and I suggest you guys pause it and read it because it is good to think about this sort of stuff. So to sum it up, it's just the reserves, why ours hasn't been successful and the impact that it could have. I agree to an extent that our VFL has. I think for years we've neglected the VFL, and that has probably set our development back quite a bit. And it's not a coincidence that our VFL is being bad and our development's been bad. But something to note with this 2025 season is we actually did have a big focus into the year on getting our reserves back on track. We put measures in place to improve. We brought in development coaches, good lead coach assistants, more players. But I think if the AFL side has had it tough this year, you've got to spare a thought for the Rezzies. With all the injuries in the AFL, we're complaining about Goldie in the ruck. Him being in the ruck in the AFL means a few weeks we haven't even had a ruck in the VFL. So on the weekend against Box Hill, as a team, we had 6 hitouts. That is 6 hitouts and in an entire game of footy. I can't remember the last time I've seen that. But that kind of tells you a bit of what's happening. Even guys like Tyler Sellers being thrown into the back line because all of our AFL defenders are injured or playing AFL footy. There are just zones in the VFL that we don't really have any strength in because we're being forced to dip so far into the reserves team to bring players into the AFL. So yeah, when you have a big injury list, it doesn't just impact your AFL, it impacts your VFL. But also on top of that, we have to remember at the start of the year, the passing of Dale Tapping. If we think that there's a morale, a bit of a low morale, which there is at the club at the moment, I know, with all the injuries, because you're seeing your mates injured and their year's done, think about how tough it would be for players to lose their senior coach. Like, not just to injury, but to lose him for life. So it's been a really tough year for the VFL. In saying that, I actually think for the first time in a while, we have seen pretty solid development. A lot of these players were talented coming into the year that Rosa drafted, but Angus Clark playing on the wing, he was drafted as a defender. He didn't come into the team as a wingman. Now he is one because we played him there for a bit in the VFL. We gave Luman Lawal a set position on the wing as well. We gave Zach Johnson more responsibilities in defence. So I think there's pretty clearly been good Vigo Vicentini is another one. Seeing him develop as fast as he did. There's pretty clearly signs that our VFL system is looking better than it has in the past because we're getting the most out of a lot of these VFL players to give them spots in the AFL team. But yeah, unfortunately, with all the injuries and everything this year, it's hard to see that because we're pretty much down near the bottom of the ladder. I think before all the injuries, we were 3-3. I think after round 6 or 7, and since then we haven't won a game. And that kind of coincides with all the injuries that we lost around that round 7, round 8, round 9 mark in the AFL. So yeah. I agree that for years we've neglected the VFL. It's set us back, I think, but I feel like we're on the right track in the VFL. I think we're seeing enough there from the young guys who are in the VFL, and even just watching them and the excitement that I feel this year compared to last year. I think we're doing much better in the VFL, despite doing worse technically. A question from Jack. Do I think our intermediate players are committed enough? Redmond and Wright are listed specifically. I'm guessing this kind of just means the senior players. And it's a good question. It is really hard to judge things like this from the outside. I hear from certain people at the club, certain things, but nothing to me suggests that certain players are not committed. That doesn't mean they aren't. And that's what Rosa really has to work on this year. I feel like if I'm Rosa, I am actively looking for the guys who aren't committed to what we're building. And look, for me, right, if for example, if Mason Redman, if he isn't committed to a rebuild, I have nothing against him. I have nothing against senior players who do not want to be involved in a rebuild. That makes sense. But if they would rather be somewhere else, it is on them to let the club know so we can build a team of committed players who love the club. I think senior players haven't exactly stood up, as you said, but it doesn't mean they're not committed. So I know for a fact that there is currently one player playing sore, but we don't have the options to replace him. So a lot of the time we will see guys not at their best and think that it's a lack of commitment, when in reality it might actually be the exact opposite. It might be a player so committed they are willing to put their body on the line. That's the interesting thing about us viewing from the outside. There is so much we don't see. I think this off-season is pretty telling though. If we can manage to find some of the guys at the club who aren't 100% invested, because there will be some of them, there has to be, I'd be shopping them around. Just because you need commitment to build a team, and that is the stage where the Bombers are at. But I think I trust Rosa to do that. It happened last year with Jake Stringer. He wasn't committed. He's at GWS now, playing good footy there now, which is good. But he wasn't the right fit for our future plans. I hope Rosa finds a few more of those kind of Jake Stringers on the list who they're good players, but they might not be good for our build. Question from Deadgen. So based on your knowledge of the draft, are we better off hitting the draft or spending capital on trade targets? There's a few draft questions, by the way, that I got. I'm just going to highlight this one, but kind of talk about a few of them. It's tough. I think if Harley Reid really wanted to join Essendon, it would be hard not to bring him in. Because also that commitment of a player like Harley Reid who wants to join a club, your club, it is hard to say no to that. That is someone who's on the outside is, putting themselves out there saying that they want to join you, even if that trade doesn't go through. That's the beauty of the trade request. So yeah, I mean, if I don't think he leaves, but if he was to request a trade to Essendon, it is tough not to get it done. Like I get that. But I think we're in a really good position that we're lucky enough to have access to a couple of NGA kids. They're probably around that second round where bids come. So if we don't attack the trade period, we could bring in, 2 top 10 picks thanks to the Melbourne trade, 2 second rounders throughout NGA, and probably try and find a goodie or two late as well, like we did with Zach Johnson last year. I think right now, and maybe it's because we're deep in champs footy and I'm thinking about the draft a lot, I think it's worth attacking the draft in some capacity. It's not a great draft, but that doesn't mean there aren't great players in it. I think the main narrative being pushed by the media is that, like you said at the end of your comment, there are no fantastic standouts in this draft. I don't think that's true. I think there is not as much top-end talent as other years, I agree, but there are players in this draft who will probably be stars, as is the case in every draft. So no, it is definitely worth attacking this draft, especially before Tassie enter. And I did also get a few questions about specific players, so thank you to Footy Expert on Twitter, Josh on Twitter, anyone else who asked. So yeah, with our first 2 rounders, our first 2, oh my goodness, what am I trying to say? The 2 first rounders, there we go. I think the club will look at someone like an Ollie Greaves, like a big-bodied midfielder that we haven't had in a while. Josh Lindsay's one that I really like. He's a really good ball user in a draft where there aren't many good ball users. Sam Grill is another midfielder that I think brings a point of difference with speed. Harley Barker is a big-bodied wingman who unfortunately recently did his ACL, so he'll fit right in. Yeah, those are a few of my favourites, my personal favourites. But then you've also got guys like Willem Dersma, Dyson Sharp maybe, Mitch Marsh, Noah Hibbins-Hargraves. I'll talk about these guys a lot this year. I'll put out quite a bit of draft content because it seems like you guys are actually keen on that. I thought I was, a bit too nerdy for the draft, with the draft, but you seem to like the draft content, so that's good. And I'll be doing a lot more with Dylan Alexander, who I know you guys like as well, so get keen for that. On to a question from Warlock Storm. Cool name. I'm guessing that's not the legal name. For most of these questions, I did kind of summarize them in my notes, but I forgot to do that here, so I'm just going to read the whole thing. They say, let's be honest, this entire year of injuries has quite possibly set us back a whole year due to very key players being absent for the year, meaning that team development and cohesion has completely stagnated. What do you think? Yes, I agree. I think injuries to an extent can, at least fast track the development of some players. There are some who wouldn't be getting as much game time if it wasn't for injuries. That is a silver lining. But I think when you've got guys like Lewis Hayes doing his ACL and Nic Bryan and Nic Martin, young players who are missing huge chunks of footy, there is nothing really you can take from that in a positive light. Like, there's no silver lining at all from the Lewis Hayes injury. That just brought Jaden Laverty into the team. There's nothing you can take from that injury. Same with Nic Martin. What good does the Nic Martin injury serve us? Absolutely nothing. Some other ones, at least you can say you're bringing in young players, but when young players are getting injured, that's where it really hurts. Zach Reed's another. Even Nick Cox. People don't really care about Nick Cox. But nothing good comes from his year being over. We don't get to see him battle for a list spot. And yes, maybe he's stuck in the VFL, but at least, like I said before, we'd have more numbers at that level. So yeah, there's really nothing good about the extent of this injury crisis. There are silver linings here and there. Archer May's a big one. Getting to see Vigo's a big one. 12 debutants. But yeah, you're pretty spot on. We've definitely taken steps forward in some areas of the development. Hard to argue that by looking at some of the young players, but Nic Martin probably misses most of 2026. Hayes misses half of it. Bryan a fair chunk. All these players without pre-seasons too. So, yeah, the injuries definitely make things a lot harder for the rebuild. Even if they gave us a really good look at some of the players for the rebuild, it is stagnating development, I think, in the case of a few of them. I agree, mate. Luke Vogels asks, speaking of injuries, I guess, how do we cover Nic Martin for next season? He throws in Johnson and Clark as options. The one thing about the Martin injury that I guess kind of helps and hinders the club is that he really doesn't have a set position. So, you don't need to replace Nic Martin, and you can't really. But yeah, it's annoying because Martin's someone who can throw anywhere. And we don't really have that player in our team for a long time now, for a whole season pretty much. I'm guessing Scott will just move magnets around more. I don't think he'll necessarily give someone Martin's role, but we might see more responsibility given to Johnson using the footy out of the back half potentially. Maybe more wing minutes to some certain players. I don't know. I think, how do we cover Nic Martin for next season? We don't really need to. We don't, I think is the short answer. I don't think we cover for Nic Martin, because you can't really for someone who's so versatile. Seng Som asks, what do I think of Jaxon Prior? Is he first choice or is he depth? For me, Prior is depth, and if we're fully fit, he probably isn't in our team. But as we've seen this year, depth is pretty important. And all things considered, I think he's shown enough to stay on the list while we build around him. Because realistically, he's not a big part of our future. And you guys know that I liked the Prior pickup. Nothing about this season has changed my views on Prior. We brought in a depth defender for a packet of chips. We've needed him to play every game, and he has. And that is all we can ask for. He's not good enough to be in a premiership winning side. But not every player on a list in a rebuild has to be. Sometimes you just need a durable player to really help you when, I guess, situations like this occur. And Jaxon Prior is a durable defender. He is depth for the future, and I think it's actually good depth to having that player who can just play footy, because we don't have many of those at the moment. There's not many players on our list who can play footy. Will asks, what would your dream targets be, trade targets be? And I can be as unrealistic as possible. You did say stay away from the big mid, so I won't say Harley Reid. I really like Sam Taylor. I've always loved Sam Taylor. Or Sam Darcy's another one too, actually. I forgot. Sam Taylor down back would be fantastic. Obviously injury prone, but just an incredible defender. Like probably the best I've seen. And that might be a hot take. I just think he's brilliant. Sam Darcy is probably the one. In my notes here, I've written Nick Dacos, but as I said Sam Taylor, I remembered Sam Darcy. Sam Darcy would be pretty. Any team would be happy with Sam Darcy. Nick Dacos as well. That's just both those players are so young, so promising, so good. Dacos or Darcy, those two there. Cooper asks if we can sue the recovery and doctors for Essendon. I don't know if we're going to be able to get much out of the lawsuit. Give it a go if you want. We can get some lawyers. But no, the main question is whether or not we think this is incompetence or bad luck, and I think it is. It is both, we've seen these issues every year. If you're saying this is bad luck as a whole, you're probably kidding yourself a bit, because there are always issues with injuries, certain injury-prone players as well. I saw a stat after the Martin ACL. There's only 2 or 3 players that have played 30 games consecutively, in a row. Currently now, and I think McGrath has the most. I think Merritt might have the second most, and then it's Caddy, who's a second-year forward. He's third in line right now for the most consecutive games in this streak. So that is really worrying. That is not good at all. That tells you a lot. But also, I think, to give a bit of leeway, and I'm not trying to give leeway, I think there needs to be change. But to play devil's advocate, I guess, a lot of these injuries are just bad luck. Harry Jones, you cannot avoid that. There's guys that haven't had many injuries before doing their ACLs. There's a few things that you just can't avoid. There's plenty that you can't avoid. There's plenty that I think possibly you can. I think there's clearly issues at the club with the fitness department, and they need to do something about that. And luckily they are investigating and resurfacing and doing what they can to fix it. But also there's a lot of bad luck. It's both. It's a perfect storm of both, I think. Refined Hoops asks if we should trade Peter Wright in the off-season if Nic Martin shows promise, because we can't fit Nic Martin in the team. I feel like Wright isn't really the thing keeping him out. I think, we need Wright as that second ruck, and I think that he's playing pretty well this year. I'm surprised that there's actually Wright hate. I think he's been one of our better senior players, because he's played 4 or 5 less games. He came into the season injured. He's our leading goal scorer now. He's doing a lot more rucking than he should be as well, so he probably should have scored more goals on top of that because he's having to ruck so much. We don't really have another key forward on the list who can ruck and play key forward, so that's a pretty important thing to have in your team. So yeah, I get the narrative around trading certain senior players. I don't think Wright is one of them. I think I'd be sticking around with him for at least a year until we find, let's see what Jerine can do, but he's nowhere near ready. I think we keep Wright for another year. Footy Lock asks a two-parter. The first part is, who are the 8 players we are delisting and trading at the end of the year? The second part is, what are my feelings on Draper staying or leaving? The first part I'm not going to answer because I am still kind of having a think about it, and I'm going to have a video out really soon about our list and everything. I just need to see a bit more from some mid-season draftees. So I will answer that one maybe next week. And also, by the way, I think 8 is a bit of an understatement. I think there could be more than 10 changes made, given the amount of mid-season draftees we brought in. The second part, Sam Draper. I don't know. I actually don't know. I think it's actually not a bad position for the club to be in a weird way. I think, if Draper stays, it clearly shows that, we've got someone who is good for the culture. Everyone loves him. He's a dynamic goal-scoring ruck. We don't really have anyone else like him on the team. But if he leaves, we get a good draft pick out of it, or hopefully get a good draft pick out of it. And just on that, I think there's been a few comments in recent videos, because, I've talked about compensation for Draper, and some have said that because he's an unrestricted free agent, you don't get compensation. You do get compensation for unrestricted free agents. It's just you can't match a bid if a club... match an offer if a club offers him, less money than us. So if a club was to come in and offer Draper... I don't know, $200,000, there's nothing we can do. He'll just accept it. But the good news is clubs seem to be offering, my understanding is that it's kind of on the verge of Band 1. Band 1 compensation gives you an early first-round pick after your first selection, so it'd be, pick 5 or 6. So it's on the verge of that, or Band 2, which would give you a pick at the end of the first round, which will slide back a bit this year with matched academy bids and everything. So ideally, if he leaves, it's a first-rounder. I think that would be well and truly overs for Sam Draper, and that would be a good situation, a good result out of the situation. If he stays, we get a ruckman and a leader at the club who everyone likes, and I think he does make the vibe better at the club. So yeah, I'm kind of torn. And how long have we been doing this for? Let's end it on this one. Let's end with my boy James, a friend of the channel, awesome bloke. Give him a follow on Twitter if you haven't already. Really good Essendon brain. We've churned over the list and got younger, and then you add in injury carnage. So the question is, how does a team that needed continuity and cohesion before the season started effectively implement a game plan and build synergy in a season? And that is a fantastic thing to remember about this year. So even before the season started, I remember saying that I was looking out for glimpses this year. I had us in the bottom 6 before the injuries. I was looking out for glimpses of what we can be in the future and hopefully will be. And even before I said that there'd be some really bad games. And I think, injuries aside, teams in this phase of their career always look a little bit lost on occasion. I personally, I love what Richmond are doing. That's a good, solid, hard rebuild, and you can see what they're doing there. And I think a lot of the time it's better from an outside perspective to look at things. So I look at Richmond, right? I think that they're doing the right thing. They've got the right players in place, and they're still building for the future. But I know that a lot of their fans have been really frustrated with the season because they've been playing some shocking footy for a lot of it. Like the last month before that Essendon game, they were getting belted every single week. They looked like a team of boys out there because they were one. I personally like what they're doing, but I know that there's a few Richmond fans who don't. I think it is always tough to look at it from the inside and like how you implement like an effective game style with what you've got at your disposal. I mean, even like we talk about bad teams and rebuilding teams. How many rebuilding teams do you look at and see a concrete game style that holds up consistently? That is the question, because even Hawthorn last year at the start of the season, everyone was talking about them tanking. I remember being with mates watching Hawthorn play Gold Coast, and they turned the TV off at halftime, Hawthorn friends, because they were getting smashed. They were getting belted. And that is, it's Melbourne a decade before their flag were a laughingstock. Richmond too. I think it is really tough to look at game style and strategy when you've got just such a shocking list. And I think, in an ideal world, we're beating Richmond and playing attractive footy on a regular basis. But I think, just the change from the Gold Coast game to the Richmond game the other week, that is kind of case in point of a rebuilding team. I thought we looked so energetic and connected against the Suns for most of that game. Like, I was excited for the future watching that. It was the kids all linking up, all playing really good, attractive footy. And then a week later, those same kids who were awesome against the Suns, they forgot how to hold the footy and kick it, and it all goes away and it looks horrible. Young teams are really inconsistent. They don't last seasons well at all. The big thing now is how in the last month or two we can best try and get the most out of this season to create a game plan or style for the future. And I think we're trying to. It might not look like it, especially in that Richmond game. I think even looking at the Dogs game, not many people would look at that match and see a team that is implementing a game style. But the reality is, in that game, we probably gave the Dogs a few extra goals solely because we were trying to take the game on and moving the footy forward when we could have been parking the bus and protecting the scoreboard. Same with Gold Coast the other week. We were doing that. It was working so well for 3 quarters, and then we continued to take the game on to our own detriment in the fourth, and it didn't work. We got overrun. I think that is all we can really do. Just continue to try and teach these kids a sustainable brand of footy. It's not going to work all the time. It's probably only going to work about 10-20% of the time with what we have at our disposal. But when it does work, you can clearly see signs. Like, no, if you go back and look at that Gold Coast game and tell me that you don't see signs of a team playing good footy, I know you're lying. But also, if you look at that Richmond game and say that you see signs of a team playing good footy, then you're lying. Like, it goes both ways. I think we've seen that in our game. There is something there. There is substance for the future. It's not going to be a constant factor when you've got a team this young, this decimated by injuries. I can guarantee you we're going to see more glimpses of the style of footy we want to play in the future to round out this year. Whether it's a quarter, whether it's a whole game, we're going to see it, and we're going to be talking about it in reviews. I can guarantee you that, but I can also guarantee you it is not going to last. It is not going to be consistent. We're going to be belted by some teams playing, what looks like horrible footy, or what is horrible footy. For me, that's not a huge issue. Even the Crows, when they were bottom 4 a few years ago, I saw the potential with the players and what they were trying to build. Sometimes you just have a crap list, and that is what you need to improve. And I think that is what is the main issue. I think we probably were maybe a bit too late to go away from that uncontested defend with the footy style. I don't think that's what we're really trying to do lately. And even the Richmond game, I saw a really fun stat out of it, which I wish I had it, but I don't. But it was a really good stat about how we were deceptively actually pretty direct against Richmond compared to usual, which surprised me. But a lot of it is because we were just not connected as a team. A lot of the time we were moving the footy forward, but moving it poorly, missing targets, kind of not being on the same page as other players. I can think of a few in my head where that happened. So yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting talking point, just how we can get the most out of this season, how we can build and implement an effective game plan in a year that is so hard to do so in. Yeah, I think, if even West Coast a few years ago when they had the similar injury crisis, no one is talking about their game style, because you can't really build a game style when you're playing over 40 players in a year. They won 2 games that year. We've won 6. I think we've shown more signs than they did. Not that, we need to compare us to West Coast. But yeah, that's that really. Just before I go, I want to reiterate some thoughts for you guys who, might be thinking that I'm probably a bit too glass half full. I'm not blindly trusting in the club. I'm not even sure if this rebuild will actually work. I think if you'd be silly to just look at what the club is doing and believe it will result in a flag. But I think we are doing the right thing. For a long time, fans have been calling for the Bombers to bottom out and rebuild rather than sticking around the bottom stages of the 8 and losing elimination finals. For years we were maybe a good team at times. Like 2017, 2019, 2021, Essendon were a good team, but we weren't a great team. We had those sugar hits. We tried to get better fast. It didn't work. Now we are, even last year, we're top 4 around this stage last year. That is enough for, some clubs to suggest that they can keep, they have what they need for a flag and they can add more players to it. Not for us. We've taken away. We've traded out some important players from that season. We're clearly rebuilding on a year that we were bottom 4 in 12 months ago, top 4 12 months ago. So yeah, it's interesting. I think we're doing the right thing. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. There is so much work that needs to be done, but at least we are. I feel like we're united in doing the right thing by rebuilding, especially before Tasmania. So I'm honestly happier where the club is at now than I have been for a little while. I think, at least I can we see us trying to improve the hard way. So that's what I think. Let me know what you guys think down below, because it is tough to, I guess, justify those thoughts when you see games like that Richmond match. But I think it's, you're not just going to get good out of nowhere. It's going to take time. I don't think it'll be soon, but at least we're trying to do things the right way. So that is all. Thank you, Bomber fans. Hopefully that has, eased some of the angst. I think I answered those questions pretty honestly. Let me know what you think down below. Feel free to disagree. Chat it out in the comments. That is that. Cheers for watching. Like, subscribe, and as always, go Bombers.